everyone. Welcome. How's everyone's Tuesday afternoon going? This is a very packed house, and I know we have about, I think, reaching 10,000 virtual attendees across the 3 days, so you guys are also live streaming here. I'm super, super honored to be moderating this panel. I know a lot of other people I've spoken with this has been kind of one that they've been looking forward to. And I know kind of hot words like Metaverse, gaming, so excited to dive deep. I'd love to give the floor to the speakers to just give quick introductions. You guys have such broad and diverse backgrounds, so I'll maybe kick it off to Stephen, and then we'll just kind of go that way.
Hello, everybody. My name's Steve Isaacs. I'm the Education Program Manager at Epic Games. I've been in this position for a little over a year, and my primary role is supporting educators and students in bringing our products into the classroom, providing resources and training and all that. Prior to starting with Epic, I was a classroom teacher for 28 years. For many of those, I taught game design and development. So, a lot of what I was doing was all about students as creators and really sort of building those opportunities for kids. So it's been awesome to be in this new position and be able to really, scale up what we're doing with educators and having that go down to the students.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Kantar. I'm head of education at Roblox, and prior to joining Roblox, I started an assessment company called Embellis that Roblox acquired in 2020. Spent a lot of my career focused on high-stakes game-based and simulation-based assessment, and now at Roblox, we're excited to bring high-quality educational games to the platform and think about how do we bring rigorous assessment par for the course as those experiences are developed as well.
Hey, great to be here, everyone. Awesome to meet so many new folks in person. My background's between startup and venture. I spent about 3 or 4 years at a firm called InQtel, which is the strategic venture arm of U.S. Defense and Intelligence. We were tracking quite a few interesting trends in edtech, reskilling, upskilling, immersive training environments, and so forth. Left InQtel with a few colleagues to co-found a venture-backed startup in the conversational AI space. And over the last year, I've gotten back to investing at Schmidt Futures, which is Eric Schmidt's family office, and actually just recently joined a new deep tech fund called First Spark Ventures, where I'm looking at AI, Metaverse, and everything in between. So excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Justin Edwards. I'm the Director of Learning Programs for Minecraft Education Edition. I joined Microsoft about a year ago. I was formerly 6 years the head of the UK exam system, or one of the 3 heads, trademark sign-off for A-level examinations, and came across into game-based learning because I have a love and a passion in this particular area. Formerly school teacher, formerly head, and formerly worked in university level education as well, and great to be here. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm Matt. Founder of Endless. We're sort of a weird beast in that we invest in things, we donate to things, and we build things. So we come at it from kind of all those angles. And the 2 main things that we're trying to do kind of build up towards a world in which every kid is a creator. We build and support games that teach kids to be creators. And then the second half was actually kind of how we were founded, which is trying to get technology to every kid in emerging markets. And the way we got into games was we realized that we could put games into the platform that we were deploying to these schools in rural communities. And we would walk in and we would see these schools of like 25 kids surrounding a math game and shouting numbers at each other, just like with total engagement. And this was like Tux Math at late 1990s game. It was a terrible game, and yet there was so much engagement. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we had a second insight, which was I was always curious how our engineers learned to code. And so I would ask the question, how do you learn? And the answer was basically, almost always, and it was just shocking how often it was, I hacked my games as a kid. And so the opportunity for games to teach, both in rural communities and the people who out the other end of the spectrum were actually engineers for a living by using games, just made it obvious we've got to get into games if we want to teach kids around the world.
Awesome. So very, very spectacular group of people here. And I forgot to quickly intro myself. I'm Claire. I'm an investor with the GSV Ventures team, but also a program lead for the summit as well. So a couple of themes that came up, even in our pre-call and also just within your intros is, I think, 2 things. Kind of just the importance of having educators and teachers be part of the conversation, many of you having educator backgrounds. And then I do want to touch on the creator pipeline from both the teacher and student end. But I do want to level set first with the definition of a metaverse. I know It's been a bit hazy. Maybe I'll kick it off to Aaron to maybe see if any of you have, I guess, strong opinions on how we should define the metaverse.
Okay, well that's awesome. I'm excited to hear everyone else's answers too, but I'll just kind of like give my 2 cents. So I mean, many of you probably know Metaverse comes from a Neil Stephenson novel called Snow Crash. At least that's where it's often referenced. And I actually prefer the term Xverse because it kind of leaves it open to our imagination to create what we want the metaverse to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be what a book written in the 90s described it as. Oh, awesome book, worth reading. I think that, to conceptualize the Xverse, just imagine a network of virtual worlds that are highly immersive and allow for a very compelling virtual presence, but also allow people to move between them easily, democratically, share content, and engage in not only just the virtual world, but the real world too. I think that's kind of the gist of what people want. And the question is, how do we get there? Because we're not quite there yet. We're in very early days.
Awesome. Any other thoughts? I know a lot of you are famous for building, I think, what we're seeing as the next big virtual worlds that our students, teachers are living, socializing, learning in.
I mean, I think the experience part is the most important, but aside from that, Aaron nailed it. I couldn't add much to that.
Awesome. So I do want to jump, now that we kind of level set what the metaverse is thinking about how we do build these virtual worlds, especially I think thinking about how teachers, students can contribute and be a part of these virtual worlds. Isaac, I know Epic just announced today the release of its next generation game engine, Unreal Engine 5. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you guys are thinking about game development, how you're making that accessible for educators, for teachers, and even students who are playing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was Matt said, the whole idea of, all students, they're creators, and that's what we're sort of trying to promote. So, I mean, Unreal Engine 5 is going to be tremendous in terms of supporting that pipeline. We also start back with, one of our products is Fortnite Creative, and that's a great entry point. There's other things coming about in that realm, as well as a product called Twin Motion. And really, our education team, the mission is to reduce barriers to entry, to help schools adopt, these tools in the classroom. They're industry standard skills. So aside from gaming, I mean, the one thing I will say, to add about the metaverse is being built on game technology, right? So we're in a position to support both the next generation of those builders, but also when it comes to industries, a wide, array of industries, fashion, animation, TV and film. These are all other industries that are really being transformed by this technology. So if we can get students, up to speed in these skills, in secondary school, we're creating opportunities, often alternate pathways for kids, whether or not they're necessarily going to advance, go on to a 4-year college or whatnot. But really, our whole mission is that, player to creator pipeline, at least on our education team.
Awesome. And I know Roblox as well. You guys also recently launched a creator fund. Tell us a little bit more about that. What was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so at Roblox, we actually have 2 vehicles. One is the Game Fund, which I think is what you're referring to, Claire, which is really to encourage indie studios to use Roblox Studio as a professional development tool and bring their experiences to Roblox. I run our Roblox Community Fund, which is focused on bringing high-quality educational experiences to the platform. So Roblox has 2 primary work streams under our education initiative. One is bringing Roblox Studio as a tool for learning computer science, game design, game development, very akin to what everyone else on the stage is doing as well. And our view there is the more the merrier, because we just want students to have those skills and to experience a lot of the 21st century skill development that I think comes along with trying to master anything related to creating as a team and developing a technical experience or product together. The other work stream that we undertake on Roblox in our education practice is thinking about how do we empower teams like Project Lead the Way, who's here today, Filament Games, who's here today, to think about building experiences that I think fully realize what folks often talk about when they think about reasons to have games as a conduit for learning, right? Travel through ancient Rome to learn about Roman history, or explore a simulation of how redlining unfolded over the last 70 years. Things that are really compelling reasons to use a 3D, interactive, dynamic, immersive medium. But oftentimes when we look at what's out there in the market for educational games, particularly those that are meant to be resources in schools for educators to bring into the classroom to supplement or undergird learning objectives and other curricular and instructional tools, we see things that are more like, you have 2 fish and they have 2s on them and they swim through a reef that has a 4 on it. And it's just kind of a letdown relative to what we all hope these digital interactive mediums could do and provide in terms of deep learning experiences. So our Roblox Community Fund is looking to make grants and investments in organizations that are really well poised to facilitate deeper learning and tap into a lot of the dynamic and iterative aspects of games that are just naturally present when trying to access some of the higher rungs of Bloom's taxonomy, some of the standards that every state and nationally we see all the time calling for creation, for development, for iteration. Yet so often when we look at our tests and when we look at our curricular and instructional programs, they get stuck on kind of some of the lower rungs of lower hanging fruit like content and knowledge acquisition. So that's what we're all about.
Awesome. And so for, a bunch of your companies here today, you all have been, working closely with education systems, existing systems. There, I guess, historically has been a trope around educators being against traditional gaming. How have you all been able to, I think, modify your approach or make gaming accessible for existing school systems? And I'd really love to throw it, to anyone in this group.
Yeah, I think it's been a challenge before the pandemic, getting people to understand the power of game-based learning, and are we just really introducing young people to more gameplay? I think that during the pandemic, suddenly there was an awful lot of educators starting to think, what tools do we immediately have that can address this need that we have, where we've sent suddenly children home and we can't connect to them? And gaming became one of the key solutions. So from our perspective, Minecraft really stepped in, particularly in the K-12 environment, but also in higher education environment, in leveraging remote teaching and allowing learners to still look at application, not just knowledge acquisition, as was stated before. And I was just talking on stage earlier. I see examples again from the pandemic, but one of the ones that kind of struck me was a professor in Israel was trying to teach the mathematics behind quantum mechanics. And suddenly his students are out of his room and he can't engage with that. So he built a Minecraft escape room. And in that Minecraft escape room, you actually had to solve the puzzles using quantum mathematics. And so suddenly children, or students in this case, were accessing new forms of education. The barriers of, does it change attainment? Does it make a difference? Is it just gameplay? Completely evaporated, to the point that the students actually started building their own escape rooms based on quantum mathematics, and now it's become a feature of the course. I think 2 years on, we're now beyond the question of, is it right? Does it make a difference? We're into a question of how do we do it better? How do we do it safer? How do we do it properly? How do we engage more educators in that platform? And we're really moving rapidly in that direction.
Also, one thing that's neat is I see so many people in this room, which is, evidence that we've, made a lot of progress. I spoke in rooms about game-based learning years ago, and they were not this crowded. So I think, and I think a big part of that, and it's interesting that who's on this panel too, is I think there was a huge paradigm shift a number of years ago. I'm a big fan of game-based learning in all forms. Civilization used for teaching, history and many other things, wonderful. We go all the way back to Oregon Trail for westward expansion. But when games like Minecraft and Roblox and, development tools like Fortnite Creative and Unreal Engine and Unity and such came into play, we got to more of this, like using these as tools, and it's more like a platform. Kids are building educational experiences. Educators are creating educational experiences. Thinking to Minecraft, Stephen Reed created the refugee crisis. I don't know if anybody's experienced that, but that's like an amazing experience in the game that kids can learn, empathy from and all of that. So I think things have shifted quite a bit when we think of that sort of thing. So again, and I think parents and teachers have bought on with that. And then another very interesting kind of piece of the puzzle is years ago, or just a few years ago, something like esports, again, was the thing we were trying to push into schools. There were a group of educators that were like, fighting with school boards for the value of esports. Now every superintendent, feels like their school has to have an esports program. So that's also bringing that in. And then also, I think, provides us with an opportunity to cross-purpose. Now we have programs that actually have some of the technology we might need because they have these programs. So I think there's been a major shift. I don't think we're fighting, nearly as hard to make this argument anymore.
That's all.
I think if I could add something, I think the other opportunity is actually what happens outside of schools. The average kid graduates from school having spent 10,000 hours playing video games. That's enough to be a virtuoso at playing video games. So the promise of games is to take those discretionary hours and turn those into learning hours. Now the challenge is that a teen which is the sweet spot. You've got to get the teen times because that's where the discretionary hours take place. They don't want to go from school to homework to a learning game. So what you have to do is get them where they're authentically going to want to be. And it's funny because when I talk to people, sometimes they're skeptical about this, understandably, because there's not a single case of something being successful at it. But the assumption is that it's almost like they think that kids are like lobotomized and just want to do TikTok and mindless games all day. But the reality is that teens are curious, teens are social, teens want to build things. And if you build something that leans into that, which all of the products on this stage have done so successfully, and then you naturally pair the learning to that, you have an opportunity to be able to teach. And I think to add another layer to it is this notion of building, right? Each of these in some capacity is a building platform. The human mind, from like Legos, I have an 18-month-old who's obsessed with building Legos and sandcastles, all the way through Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite Creative. If you lean into the fact that like the teen mind wants to build, whether it's artistic or creative or art or 3D modeling or storytelling, and you give them a platform through games to be able to learn by building, by doing something they authentically want to, I think that you can get some of those 10,000 hours.
Just to echo what everyone said, I agree on the creation side that there's no better way, I would argue, to facilitate a whole bunch of skills that all of us hopefully want to impart on kids and to have them discover computer science, game design, the art aspects of gaming. I think all of our platforms facilitate that beautifully. I think the other side of the equation is where we've historically underperformed as a category, where we hope for these enriching digital experiences that span all subjects, all grade levels, and perhaps facilitate the deeper thinking. And there are a few studios out there, I named Filament, but just to call them out again, who have done a really nice job doing that for a long time. But I think the unspoken truth is that building a team that has the full game side of the house and the full education side of the house, who are really deep on lots of state standards or curricular learning objectives, it's a huge surface area. And we don't have funding mechanisms right now that make it easy for teams of folks to come together and offer kind of work for hire services to any of the creators on our platform for times when an individual educator looks at a problem space and just feels that's too daunting to try and take on, in addition to doing all the work they're doing in school and creating their traditional lesson plans. So I think there's a shortage, particularly still, and I know Jessica Lindell was just speaking about this as well, and it sounds like she's a little bit more bullish maybe than I am on how many designers are out there, but still always looking for those game designers who are capable of empathizing with the learning scientists, the instructional designers, having a deep understanding of what does it mean to facilitate rigorous learning through game mechanics in a way that's not adding in the reward system after the fact and using that to motivate kids through the loop, but instead using the impetus for learning as the very thing that drives the way kids are spending time in the activities. And that work is just brutally hard. And I think we all, as practitioners, have a responsibility to try and encourage game designers and instructional and learning designers to try and bridge that gap more and think about how they might enrich themselves so that they can bring this to everyone's teams to think in that way that really marries the learning objectives and the mechanics all the way through.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue actually to my next question I wanted to touch on was just around learning science and pedagogy. This constant tug between games being built by educators and then games or that don't truly engage students. I think in our last call, we mentioned something around chocolate-covered broccoli. But then on the flip side, you have games built by gamers that don't actually really take into consideration outcomes and learning and assessments. Rebecca, I'd actually throw it back to you, and I'd love to hear, especially from your experience at Embellis, just around how you guys approach assessments at all of your organizations.
Yeah, so assessment is, if educational and learning games was hard, I think assessment games or gamified assessments, whatever you want to call them, it's like the hardest corner of the hardest segment of the education market, particularly when you're looking at high stakes, summative, college application or admissions context, workforce context. It really matters that your tool is reliable, predictive, and valid. And Jack was somewhere out here who's obviously worked on this for decades as well. But building tests that determine whether or not someone has access to an opportunity on the back end of whether they pass or fail, that matters. And making sure that you're reliable, precise, et cetera, in your definition of what should you be measuring, and then that you've done a good job translating the constructs of interest into your measurement tool. And we spent at Embellis about 6 years trying to get this right. And it, just as building a learning game, it requires a similar team that's extremely multidisciplinary. You have learning scientists, data scientists, game designers, psychometricians, AI ML folks, and then a full game side of the house from artists to designers to UI, UX, et cetera. And building out that roster of folks and then having a few people who are skilled enough to conduct all of them working together at every phase of development is expensive and difficult. And it's very intellectually demanding work. So what our team is hoping to do, because we still have our assessment team with us and we have our education work at Roblox, we're hoping to try and make that a little bit easier for folks. So if you have a team of data scientists at your organization now, maybe you have instructional designers, but you've never tried to build game-based assessment embedded in learning experiences, our hope is we'll be able to make a number of tools available that start to demystify how does one do that, right? How do we not have pop-up multiple choice questions about tell me what you just learned in that game loop, but instead is constantly looking for a very intentional breadcrumbs trail of evidence about everything you did all the way through the experience and why it matters. And it's going to take lots of iteration for any organization that attempts it. It took us many years to figure out how to do these in a reliably good way. But I think once you get it, it's worth it because that really makes the case for this as a category of time worth spending in classrooms, right? If we can't speak to some level of efficacy and measure how students are interacting with these experiences, I'm not sure that the space has much longevity.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think another thought, when teams hire in Silicon Valley, for an engineer, one of the first places they look is GitHub. You're hiring for a designer, you go to Behance. You see their portfolio and you see their actual work. You can see the commits they've got. You can see how, all sorts of statistics on how good of an engineer or a designer they are. In a creation world, you can do the same thing, right? So if you're part of a creation community and you're documenting the contributions that people have made and the appreciation that the community has for them, one of our best engineers ever we hired from Stack Overflow, he was the #1 rated GTK expert on Stack Overflow. That's a pretty good gauge of whether that person's going to know the stack and also have the attributes that we want. And so at the same time also, portfolios are super important. So if you're coming out of college without a portfolio, it's a lot harder to get a job than when you're coming out of college with a portfolio. When you're applying to schools with a portfolio versus without a portfolio, it's a totally different ballgame. And so I think on the creation side, if you have both a community that's able to measure your contributions as well as portfolio, it makes all the difference.
Yeah, I think, on the assessment side, I spend a lot of time on standards-based assessment and university entrance examinations, and it's an industry that is ripe and timely for a bit of reform. But one of the things you can do in gaming is, of course, you can pull out knowledge and understanding-based assessments in linear format. We built in APIs, so anybody with LMSs out there or data sets, you can tap into kind of APIs and pull that data out. But it's how do you go beyond that? How do you go to creative solution assessment, project-based learning assessment, portfolio-based assessment that is deeper, richer, and looks at creativity and application? And we've built in tools to do that with inside the game, so you can actually document, you can look at kind of 3D models and 3D streams, and you can assess those in real time as well. but it needs transformation inside the assessment industry or our attitudes towards assessment in order to start leveraging some of the real power that we can get from the game-based product or the game-based output that learners are so capable of producing. And when you open that box up, it's amazing how far learners will go with the learning. So we've set projects that aren't, for example, understanding climate change. It's not about understanding climate change, it's understanding the solutions to climate change. And you give students an open world in our game or any of these games, and you just say, articulate the solutions, and they will come up with 50, 60 solutions. They will present those solutions to you. They will articulate them. People in power will say, well, that's going to cost us 750 million. Yeah, it is, it might, but the children are able to come up with great solutions, and that's where assessment should sit. It shouldn't sit on the understanding, it should sit on the application.
That's fascinating. And so for, I'm sure, some people who sit at the intersection of building something that's, gaming and education related, I'd love to, I think, ask you guys a little bit more about how you're thinking about building in that space, especially fundraising in that area, but also managing, those two houses of both gaming, building a gaming team as well as a learning science team. How do you, as a founder, navigate building something that sits at this intersection?
I guess I'll take that. It's brutally hard too. I know that's my theme of the day, but I think one of the challenges, the backbone of R&D that's required, especially again, if you're going after high stakes, I want to just differentiate from people who aren't super deep on assessment. Formative assessment, where you might have something built in throughout an experience and perhaps an educator's looking at it and using it to inform what they want to teach next, or if a student needs extra help in a particular area. That kind of assessment is difficult, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have the same pressures and the same threat vectors that anything that's high stakes, right? That's determining opportunity and that's gating access. That's when you see cheating, it's when you see coaching, it's when you see all sorts of inequities start to creep in because people really care about doing well on your test. And what we found in Embellis, and I can't speak to every other organization, maybe others will have more success, but what we found is you have to amass just so much capital to create the backbone, the heart, the nervous system of team technical capabilities and proven implementations before you can go after some of the bigger contexts in which we all rely on assessment and try and turn those into contexts that leverage game-based or simulation-based assessment. So if you think about, again, the applications such as college admissions, the highest of high stakes that all of us are familiar with, if you try and go after building an alternative admissions test, you have to be ready to have just a litany of content to keep it fresh. Because as soon as you reuse any of the same game-based or simulation-based tasks, folks are out there dissecting it. I mean, literally, for one of our tasks, there's a 200-page guide on how to cheat, coach, whatever your way through it. So you have to be ready for those kinds of pressures, and that means more and more content. And as anyone who's worked in gaming spaces knows, creating more of these virtual environments with all the new assets and different animations and different systems that your levels designers are designing, I mean, this is really expensive. And this, I think, is the challenge that we see when we're thinking about how do investors or how does NSF or anyone who wants, a lot of the philanthropic organizations as well, how do they make investments in progressing the application of games and simulations and assessment? This is the nut to crack, right? Until you pool enough money in one vehicle and kind of take a bet on it being able to build enough of a Palantir-esque backbone before it starts adding appendages of all these different applications, whether that's corporate, whether that's education, whether that's military, whatever else folks might be interested in, you have to have that R&D checked off. And it takes a long time, and I think tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think it's somewhat incompatible, largely with the existing infrastructure we have in the venture community, the private equity community, to try and invest in something that's really more biotech-like, but is stuck in an education market that frankly doesn't support biotech returns. So that's not to dissuade folks. I think one thing that all of our platforms do well is offer the platform itself as a great starting place that makes it much less expensive to try and transact on how do you build assessment modules, how do you build whole assessments, and I hope folks do that. But I still think amassing that team and the talent and getting really sophisticated at thinking about the context for assessment, whether that's a state level, school level, individual class level, that's still hard and time consuming and expensive.
Yeah, those are great points. I'll just piggyback off that a little bit. One of the really interesting threads that I'm seeing kind of in the startup world is companies that are trying to weave education directly into their engagement model. So this is gaming and metaverse companies that aren't creating education tools per se, but are taking seriously the education aspect. And all of these issues that you just brought up are kind of plaguing them. The infrastructure just isn't there. So doing this in a principled way requires, like you said, working with scientists and creating learning objectives and assessments and things like that. But you can kind of see the glimmers of hope, right? Like if you were to make education an active feature in a lot of these games, there are tons of opportunities for kids and even adults to still have fun and not even realize that they're learning and growing intellectually. And I think especially in the soft skills areas where, we're not necessarily, running through a textbook or curriculum, but more training in dialogue and memory and attention and things like that seem to be areas where entrepreneurs are becoming more and more focused.
Our story is, I think, a little different because we're not on a company level building necessarily deep learning games. However, we're building the tools that people are using to create those. And you had mentioned Unreal Engine 5 and the tool set that now is available to people. And actually, another interesting thing about this is that we, a long time ago, changed our licensing model. So generally speaking, people can use Unreal Engine without, paying a licensing fee initially. I believe it's when they make their first $1 million with a product they publish with it, then they start talking about licensing. But what that did, in my opinion, is it opened this up to so many different industries and so many different people and really smart people that got their hands on our tools and were starting to build these environments and these games. And I think that's, sort of our direction. And then on the education side, as I've mentioned, a lot of it's about getting kids involved in creation. So, to touch a little on assessment, and if I ever start needing to really get into assessment, I'm going to go right to Rebecca for sure in terms of the deep learning side. But with what we've done is we've created activities and lessons and things that teachers can bring into the classroom that really, again, use our tools to teach a content area where they're using it as a replacement for maybe another tool like PowerPoint or something. Kids are often much more engaged in using a tool like Fortnite Creative or Unreal Engine. So the assessment piece, kind of ends up with the teachers in terms of them assessing the learning outcomes that they would, regardless of what the project was and what they're expecting. So kids are still going through that whole process. It's just not being assessed in game in the same way.
You asked about the team, and we've got a bunch of experience working with a bunch of different teams, so I'll kind of try to do a quick survey of it. So the first is that we got very, very lucky finding a team called Eline Media, which actually Jessica Lindell called out in the last session as a model of it. Mike is over there. You should talk to him if you want to speak to somebody who really knows what they're doing. So we got very lucky with someone who's got a decade of experience building consumer games and learning games and the mix between them. At the same time, then I sort of said, okay, we're going to set up a little lab, and the idea is just to see how cheaply we can build games, how many different types of games we, sort of on my own on the side. Do I believe in this game? Just by actually building things and kind of prove it type of thing. And that was a game team, tiny little team, entirely consisting of people who built consumer games and had no education background. Some had done a little bit of teaching, but it was primarily game designers. And the number of cool game designs that we had, I'm looking at this back here, and it reminds me of the White House, which was an island, and you have to get to the top of it, and everything's in white, and you're teaching CSS by splattering color throughout it, and you go through the different levels, and we had kids who were super hooked on it. And that game cost us, I don't know, $30,000 to build. And the number of games that we were cranking out, we were partnering with emerging market studios using the Unity Asset Store, combined with real developers that knew how to build really engaging games. And the result of it, despite the cost, was actually surprisingly high quality games that were teaching across a pile of different mechanics and a pile of different genres with, the fun cranked up, the learning cranked up across, we just kind of said, how many different angles can we tackle this at? And the answer was just shocking. There are so many different ways, but you've got to have people who know how to build real consumer games. From our perspective, it's the merging of two circles very much on a Venn diagram basis and bring them together. And what we were finding was that game builders who were building amazing games with amazing mechanics just didn't have the experience to come at the education side. So we merged them with educators and in two ways. One was merging with established educational institutes. So as an example, Cambridge University has launched Worlds which teach English language. They brought all that knowledge around how you teach the pedagogy of language acquisition and merged that with a games company in the UK who then worked together. And we just were able to stand back as the moderator between the two as kind of game took the forefront, education, pedagogy took the forefront to develop that. We've also gone further because there's an awful lot of NGOs and agencies out there in the world who already have educational content, and their content is of deep value, it's of deep meaning, particularly in the K-12 market. Maybe it's around topics that are current right now, but getting those organizations the opportunity to use the game and game builders and game designers. So suddenly you've got a small outfit somewhere in the world as a game designer working with somebody like UNESCO, and they're building content for UNESCO. So UNESCO understand the subject matter, and they bring the validity to the subject matter, and they bring that educational know-how because they've been already taking their material out for years. Plus a small game house which gets the value of that partnership or is able to bring that into the game arena. And consistently, we're now starting to see game creators on platform around the world who are able now to make that reach out because, as I said before, the argument of whether game-based learning makes a difference is won. It's done. The issue now is how we connect everybody together to leverage the platforms that we have.
And just to echo that, I think it brings up an important point, right? The most difficult part, I don't think, is actually the coding or using any one of our tools. I mean, we have tons of resources on how to do that. The most difficult part is that marrying of the true expertise, whether it's in resettling refugees or next generation science standards. There are lots of organizations who have educators employed and many subject matter experts already on their teams, and they just need to be paired with a studio that knows how to empathize, or an individual or a group of individuals, doesn't matter the configuration, really understands how to bring that to life in a gaming capacity. So I think we often get hung up on we need a developer to code this, and that's actually not the limiting reagent. It's much more so, do you have a team who gets the drawing board phase and the drafting phase right? And sometimes that's educators, sometimes it's big studios. I think it really depends on the specific subject area you're trying to cover in a game, and some of them need to be really deep, many hours of content. Sometimes they're much smaller and still very effective at communicating what they're trying to share.
Wow. I think that's been super insightful. I mean, all of your platforms have clearly been able to, reach that secret sauce or that unlock that you all have been describing that has been very difficult to achieve. I know we're coming up on time, but I'd love to kind of ask a two-part question to all of you and just get your opinion on one. I think, it's been weighing on us how you all are thinking about the metaverse, what that means to your platforms, or personally how you're thinking about that in gaming. And then two, what you're most excited by or optimistic for in, I guess, the intersection of gaming and education.
So when it comes to the metaverse, one of the cool things is I think our kids are already there. We're not really already there, but we're pretty close, and we're having metaverse experiences that all of these tools are contributing to. So they bring their expertise. I think that's been mentioned a few times too, and that's something we need to leverage. So that's what I'm excited about. Bringing that next generation of creators to life and supporting that how we can.
I would say one of the most defining aspects, as Roblox imagines it, of the metaverse really involves co-experience, right? People doing things together that are fun, that are interesting, that are adventuresome, that are broadening their horizons. It's not about replacing all of your day every day where you're going to be sitting in front of a screen living a virtual life instead of your real one. It's instead about facilitating human co-experience and connection and playful learning. And what I'm truly looking forward to is seeing so many of the experiences that we have community members building being multiplayer. So often in education, it's like drill and kill as an individual as opposed to truly a team of students working on something that a team of adults would work on in real life, and being able to bring that to the metaverse, I think will be really exciting.
As far as Metaverse, I think I'm most interested in, how we're going to solve the interoperability problem. I feel like it's a key barrier to get over to kind of approach this vision that we all have and let people actually move between different worlds and, exchange virtual goods with each other and content. I think the thing I'm most excited about is I look a lot at virtual avatars, and that's kind of one of the investment themes we have. Very excited about bringing this to education. I mean, I would love Jimi Hendrix to teach me geometry. That would just be incredible. I think I would have really enjoyed that subject if that had been around.
I think we have between us powerful channels. They are some of the farthest reaching channels available today, more impactful than most other media channels. So I'm excited at the opportunity of using those channels to teach the toughest problems. Steve talked earlier about the refugee world. We've done stuff around peace laureates. We've done stuff around climate change. Let's use these platforms to get the message out for good.
To that point, someone was joking that I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say this on the panel, that if you put the platforms that you all have together and turned it into a religion, it would be the largest religion in the world. And the quick thoughts on the metaverse, that if all these people are going to spend all this time and money building a metaverse for entertainment, we also need to spend some time on the metaverse of learning. And then the thing I'm most excited about, strangely ties to the thing I'm most dejected about, which is that right now we are not necessarily, we're in a hard moment in the world. We're in a hard moment with what's happening in Ukraine. We're in a hard moment in what's happening with schools. Someone was just describing that high schools have just disintegrated, was the word they used, that there aren't teachers. You have teachers in Illinois that are having to dial in on Zoom, the physics teacher, because there just aren't the teachers for that. And so there is a hard moment, and at the same time, 21st century skills, it's such a cliche thing, and yet it's the skills of the future, right? Like the skills that you will be required to know in order to have a job in the future. So the cliche of the term, we need to focus on how important those skills are, and there aren't the teachers to teach it. The online classes we know don't work, so how are we going to teach those? And the reason I am excited and optimistic is because I really just believe like kids want to do this. They want to play games, they want to hack games, they want to build games. We know this, right? And so if we can harness that, if there are more people trying to harness that, we will harness it, we will win it. And I'm just super excited about what that future looks like.
Awesome. I know we're coming up on time. Thank you all for joining us. Please give a round of applause for my amazing panelists. Thank you.